Hey Internet friends! For many, school is about to be back in session, and that means a selective history of assorted half-truths await within the confines of Common Core. But summer isn't quite over yet. We have enough time for one last road trip, and today we're traveling to Washington, D.C. When I was in school, I never really took an interest in history because history lessons were about as bland as a saltine cracker, with a bunch of dates and names of dead people to memorize. So that's why today I'm going to spice things up a little bit and venture down the rabbit hole of what we were never taught about Washington, D.C. And no, there will be no pop quiz at the end.
A third city-state was officially created in 1982. That city-state is called the District of Columbia and is located on 10 square miles of land in the heart of Washington.
Why is all of our government's power located in a jurisdiction called the District of Columbia? Though the original United States capital was located in Philadelphia, today our nation's capital is Washington, D.C., a city located between Virginia and Maryland, serving as home to the three branches of our federal government. The D.C. stands for the District of Columbia, which is the federal district containing the city of Washington, with Washington being named after the first U.S. president, George Washington. The official narrative on the Columbia portion is in reference to Christopher Columbus, as he first named this country Columbia. If you dig a little deeper, you'll find that Columbia is a goddess used to personify the New World. So you could say that the District of Columbia is the temple of this goddess, giving us very pagan roots at the core of our nation.
The flag of Washington's District of Columbia has 3 red stars, one for each city-state in the 3-city empire. This corporate empire of 3 city-states controls the world economically through London's inner city, militarily through the District of Columbia, and spiritually through the Vatican.
Why is Washington, D.C. totally separate from the rest of the United States? Much like Vatican City and the City of London, Washington, D.C. has its own sovereignty. And these 3 city-states are not connected to the nations in which they reside. You know how the City of London isn't part of Greater London? And Vatican City isn't technically part of Rome? Well, many states within the United States have their own constitution and their own flags, but Washington, D.C. isn't a state. The D.C. flag, which is said to have been reflective of George Washington's coat of arms, features 3 stars. Are those stars representative of the 3 city-states that exist as corporate entities outside of their respective nations? Vatican City, the religious hub. The City of London, the banking central. In Washington, D.C., the military leg of the empire. Being its own city-state, D.C. has its own police force that shares a direct link with Congress, its own mayor, and its own set of laws. Passed by Congress, the Act of 1871 provided a government for the 10-mile parcel of land known as the District of Columbia, allowing Washington, D.C. to act as a corporation outside of the original Constitution of the United States. The Act of 1871 changed our country's founding fathers' original Constitution for the United States for America to the Constitution of the United States of America. A mixture of subtle yet impactful wording, as well as cleverly marketing this act as a way to unify the territorial government for the entire District of Columbia, are contributing factors to how such a major act flew under the radar, ultimately overturning the United States constitutional republic. Since 1871, the federal government has usurped nearly all the power that was formerly held in the hands of the people. How on earth was Congress able to pass a separate constitution and incorporate the United States? In 1871, the U.S. was going through a lot of turmoil. The nation was pretty broke and vulnerable after the Civil War, and the London bankers, also known as the Rothschilds, who, side note, wish I could get through a video without having to mention them, were ready to make a deal with Congress to remedy that turmoil. The Rothschilds and other European financiers made a lot of credit available in the aftermath of the Civil War, as a means to 1. Fight Lincoln's greenback monetary system, and 2. Collect interest from those who desperately needed the money, which would be the United States government at the time. A corporation, by definition, is a legal entity separate from its owners. In its most notable feature, a corporation protects its owners from personal liability for corporate debts and obligations, well, within limits.
We have To look at is the president is the chief executive officer of this corporation called the United States of America.
Was the Act of 1871 as harmless as some claim? Just an act to provide a government for the District of Columbia and nothing more? Well, let's look at the ramifications of the act being passed. Who benefited from it? Is the Act of 1871 the reason why Congress passed the Federal Reserve Act of 1913? A private corporation established their private bank, acting as the central bank of the United States. But hold up, the Federal Reserve isn't even a government institution. It's a privately owned banking system. Comment below if they taught you that in school, because they sure didn't teach me. Consequently, the federal government went essentially bankrupt in the 1930s, while Social Security numbers started being assigned in 1936. Coincidence? Even today, with talk of Russia meddling in the United States elections, what's not being addressed, but what is a direct result of the Act of 1871, is that foreign lobbyists have influence in U.S. elections and policies. Here's one example: the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, the AIPAC convention at which our politicians try to appeal to the foreign lobbyists. Money in the pocket of the politician, in laws that come from the lobbyists that benefit their foreign nation. So are the 50 states the franchises under the umbrella corporation of the United States? And are citizens who are assigned a social security number and a birth certificate an asset of the corporation? Are we citizens or are we employees?
What difference at this point does it?
And finally, in the famous words of Hillary Clinton, at this point, what difference does it make? This will be the go-to argument on the lips of those who believe the focus on an incorporated United States is nothing more than the rambling of crazy conspiracy theorists. Even if we've established that during a time when the United States was basically bankrupt, depleted, and weakened, Congress played let's make a deal with foreign bankers. And these bankers put stipulations in place to ensure that they'd be paid back and then some. That's why Congress passed an act to allow for a separate form of government for the District of Columbia, changing the government we had, which was a constitutional republic, to a corporation. Even if we've established all of that in this video, what difference does it make? What can we all do about it? I suspect if you clicked on this video and watched it all the way through, you sense something is deeply amiss at the core of the United States. In my opinion, we are already ahead of the curve. Because you can't look for a remedy if you are unaware the problem exists. And this facade of the government being sovereign is perpetuated throughout our school systems. We're being indoctrinated into complacency and ignorance. So on an individual level, when a corporation infringes on your human or your civil rights, how can you fight that when the corporation shields individual members from liability? And what if that corporation is your government? It's not right. And it'd be one thing if the supposedly elected politicians went to Washington, D.C. and worked for the incorporated United States, if that revenue was funneled back into the country rather than foreign interests. Beyond gossip of a scandalous extramarital affair, politicians are rarely tried for their treasonous behavior. Is this because they function under the umbrella of a corporation and therefore can avoid liability for their treason? If they taught us more about Washington, D.C. in school, the real Washington, D.C., beyond the myth of George Washington chopping down a cherry tree and throwing in useless facts like how 2 U.S. presidents had pet alligators in the White House, would we be able to 1. Recognize the problem, 2. Trace the roots of the problem back to individuals and the force behind those individuals so we could 3. Form solutions that acknowledge every aspect of the illness? Beyond just putting a band-aid on the symptom. Would we continue to fight amongst ourselves if we realized the issue was deeper than right versus left? Who would be afraid of people asking why history has been suppressed? Who would try to stop the mass awakening? Gee, I wonder. Let me know your thoughts. I always look forward to reading your comments. Thank you so much for subscribing and supporting my channel on Patreon. Bye!